very intentional with this presentation. It is an example of propaganda with the intended goal of creating demand for independent African-centered schools. I believe that this is our only solution as African people, whether we call ourselves African Americans, Black, or anything related. Once the demand for these schools reaches a critical mass in our communities, then those that have the wherewithal and the resources to establish and operate these educational spaces will be charged with doing so. It is part of the evangelizing of Black nationalism that Malcolm X directed us to do in his 1964 Ballad of the Bullet speech. Independent African-centered schools are integral to Black nationalism. In the meantime, we have to refine our analysis in order to be able to create these institutions. Education reform is for many a hustle, and it is good work if you can get it. In terms of reform, Black people don't need reform, which, as Osajifo Kwame Nkrumah stated in his book Consciencism, actually reform represents minor adjustments to an existing system, which is meant to keep that larger system intact, and that the reform actually empowers it and makes it stronger. So it gives the impression that things are really changing, but actually no, it's making the fundamental foundational system even stronger, right? What our people need is to experience systemic change and a complete overhaul, because what I call the symbiotic parasitic relationship between Europeans and Africans is literally killing us daily. We require revolutionary action in contrast with reform efforts in order to overcome our educational challenges. I argue that these public and charter schools that our children attend are not failing. They're not failing at all. They're functioning properly and doing what they have always been intended to do by those that established them. And we should stop misusing the English language by parroting this popular statement of these schools are failing. It is similar to white liberal northern politicians in the 1960s identifying the state of Mississippi as the racist problem, when in fact, Mississippi was only part and parcel of an entirely racist United States of America. The question has to be asked, from whose perspective are the schools failing? Are they failing from the perspective of a global white supremacist neo-colonial power structure? Or is it failing from the perspective of Africans in America? Who controls these schools? And if we don't control it, regardless of how many Black principals and teachers like myself there are in these schools, shouldn't we view its success or failure in the context of those that control it? Wouldn't this just make more sense? And maybe it is our collective misunderstanding of the Brown versus Board of Education decision of 1954 and our lack of understanding of interest convergence theory that Derek Bell presents in his outlines in his book, Silent Covenants, that causes some of this. Many of us really believe that the purpose and the end game of the Supreme Court ruling was to have Black children and white children be educated together and to build America together on equal footing for the benefit of all. This is just false. It's just plain false. 10 years after the Supreme Court decision in 1964, less than 10% of schools were integrated, and how many are truly integrated today? We are not in this together, so to speak. There's a seesaw effect. Anybody who's ever been to the playground knows that when one person is up, where's the other person at? Damn, this is what's going on. We're not in this together. Frantz Fanon said, education is meant for the establishment or reinforcement of a society's values and institutions. So if we believe this, why would we expect public or charter schools in this country governed by the same European culture and worldview to fundamentally be meant to benefit Africans in America that have historically been oppressed and held at the bottom of the social hierarchy for the benefit of other ethnic groups in this society? Why would schools in which billions of dollars are invested in not be meant to maintain the societal status quo? Some may say, but what about you, Akil? You are educated. You went to so-called good schools. I did. But why did I have to be a part of a so-called elite group allowed access to the white man's good schools while the majority of my people were left to struggle through miseducation and diseducation in the other schools, still controlled by the same people? This must be asked. And to be clear, the so-called good schools, I call them so-called good schools, provide miseducation as well. Some of us are allowed, I'll say this, some of us are allowed access to the good schools as part of a political strategy meant to create and maintain a class of bourgeois Negroes useless to the Black race in terms of nation building, and meant to create and maintain, and meant to be pimped out to the highest bidder for their low price by the white supremacist power structure. all the while walking around with our chest poked out, thinking that we are successful. And many call this hashtag Black excellence. But what is excellent about not building for your own people? And yes, this is self-directed criticism, because I was a member of this pathetic class of black people and believed in its, once upon a time, believed in its individualistic and sycophantic goals. But thankfully, I was influenced to realize the error in my ideological ways. Many among us complain of the behavior of our youth in the schools. The operative word is our. If we take ownership of our children, the concern will naturally follow. From this, we will then act to create schools and other institutions that will nurture and develop our youth properly. We've allowed our youth to be made crazy in schools we don't control, neighborhoods we inhabit but don't control, and households dominated by Eurocentric value systems. And I had to throw the household part in there because a lot of people say, well, it starts in the home, it starts in the home. Well, a lot of these households that are supposed to be so good with these so-called good kids that do well in school, they're still governed by Eurocentric values, which have long-term deleterious effects anyway. This lack of control is the seed of the problem. And if some might be offended because I sound like I'm just blaming the white man in order to absolve ourselves of responsibility for our collective bad behavior, I assure you I'm not. We cannot solve our problems if we do not adequately and accurately assess the root causes of the problems. In fact, I think that it is the formally trained and educated Africans in America, myself included, with resources that should take more responsibility for nation building, for ourselves in favor of nation building for America to the direct long-term benefit of whites and other ethnic groups. But we were taught to build America in these so-called good schools some of us went to. So let's identify some of these so-called problems in these schools that makes us think that the schools are failing. Number one, school violence in the physical sense. That's admitted, that's public. That's, school bullying is a big deal, is a big thing. School violence, fighting in schools, teachers being assaulted, students being assaulted. That's something that's publicized. But what's not publicized is the cultural violence, the attack on the culture of black children, and black children being consistently and innately being made to feel inferior within these institutions. You sit in a math class and you open up any math textbook and all you see is white people in there. So you think that you have no claim to, and your people and people that look like you have never done mathematics, right? Same thing with science. All the theories are named after Europeans, right? History. Our history starts in 1619, as if the great Europeans had to go to Africa and rescue us from the dark continent and bring us here, and that's when everything started for us. So that's a form of cultural violence that's never discussed. But the cultural violence is actually, they admit that that's success. They'll admit that that's success because that's meant to get us to assimilate, to fit in. Another so-called problem, lack of academic motivation, low standardized test scores, student drug use. Many of our youth are violent with each other, misogynistic, drug addicted, music addicted. Some rather sit in class and socialize with each other while teachers are teaching. They rather sleep, rather use social media on their phones, and they've been trained to function in this way within these schools. This is the norm. They've been trained to do this. There's nothing really crazy about this. This is the training, the subtle training. Nothing is coincidental or accidental. They've been trained to be slaves in the way that Frederick Douglass spoke of by being denied knowledge useful for legitimate group advancement. With the exception of a few teachers, counselors, or administrators, support staff here and there, most adults in these buildings, even if well-intentioned, basically underdevelop the children in the same way that Europe underdeveloped Africa. Collectively, as black people applied this same type of math for collective investment. If 1,000 black people each put up $1,000, that equals $1 million. Or if we didn't have $1,000, if 10,000 black people each put up $100, that also equals $1 million. Think about how many grocery stores, farms, schools, hospitals, clothing manufacturing warehouses, etc. could be developed for this amount of money. As John Herbert Clark also said, he said the people that can't even make their own drawers is not ready to be a nation. These are very basic things that we should be thinking about. Now, 10,000 black people will easily put up $100 for powerhouse tickets because, and this is not an attempt to, point out so-called innate black pathology. I don't believe in that, but And again, in the schools and in the institutions, we've been taught to trust anything owned and operated by other people, such as whites, Asians, and Arabs. So the Powerhouse concert, the annual concert, is part of the domain of that. So we trust that. So we think that that's a good investment. This is how we've been conditioned since the beginning, since kindergarten, since Head Start. And it's reinforced on a daily basis. As long as we're not pooling our resources, then it's business as usual, and other groups keep winning, courtesy of the so-called failing schools. So how is the school failing if it helps some people win? This ties right into the gentrification conversation also, which I don't like to use the term gentrification. I think it's too soft. I think it's like a euphemism. I like the term settler colonialism better.
What's it called? Say it again.
Gentrification?
Yeah, no,
Settler colonialism. Settler colonialism, or even ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, ethnic.
You know, if you want to take it, we can take it there.
That's right. That's what it is.
So how is it that there are schools right now that are majority or 100% black with student populations and are located in communities where this same settler colonialism is taking place daily, and this conversation does not even come up at all within the halls of these schools? Think about the Great Schools Compact. My son went to a school in North Philly. Well, they don't like to call it North Philly anymore because it's right by Spring Garden Street. And I went to a parent meeting at the school one day, and it was me and one other parent. Now again, you know, a lot of people like to complain about low parent turnout at events like this. But I say it's not because black parents don't care about their kids. It's not because black parents don't care about education. It's because black parents have not been educated about the value of these meetings. They also, a lot of schools do not have an inviting atmosphere. They're not very welcoming. You know, and in a lot of cases, a lot of schools do not want parents involved. They do not want parents advocating, because then a lot of teachers and a lot of administrators will be held accountable.
Right.
They would have to really do their real job. And they don't want that, right? But it's cute to just blame black parents and say, you know, y'all care about, you know, going to the club, but you don't care about coming to back to school night. There are reasons for that. There are reasons for that, right? So I'm at this meeting, and I found out about the Great Schools Compact. Now, the Great Schools Compact was explained to me as an idea put together by some real estate developers in Philadelphia that recognized that a lot of basically the white people, the young professional white people that have children, by the time that live in the area around Center City, a lot of them are either, by the time their children get to school age, they're either sending their children to private schools or they're moving to the suburbs to take advantage of those public schools. So what they're saying, what the Great Schools Compact was supposed to be, was an effort to basically to build up the public schools near the Center City area. And my son's school happened to have been one of them. So, you know, they got this brand new playground and everything. But what we learned, if we study white supremacy, when we study colonialism, we realize that, okay, that's not for us. It's there now, and our children are there now, but will our children be there 5 years from now? Will they be there 10 years from now? So it's not for us. Like we just happen to be there right now, but in a minute, our children are not going to be there anyway. So it's not even really for us, right? And I mean, historically, we can look at the history. Like when have white people ever wanted to really go to school with us? If you really look at the history, and we're really honest, I mean, we can look at like Prince Edward County. I believe it was Prince Edward County, Virginia. After the Supreme Court decision comes down in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, they decided to shut the public school system down rather than send their children to school with black people. They shut the school district down. But I think we can learn some things from them, because they were willing to say, you know what, we'll go independent. It is so important to us for our children not to sit in classrooms with these black people that we will shut the public school system down and go independent and create independent educational spaces for our children. And that's what they did. And the public school system in that county in Virginia was shut down for 5 years. 5 whole years. They were serious about how they wanted to educate their children. Now, if anything, back to the settler colonialism. If anything, an ideal situation would be for the children in these same schools, in these neighborhoods, to be able to stand up and speak truth to power. But that's just it. This is not meant to be the ideal situation for us. It's ideal for the white supremacist neo-colonial power structure. This is not for us. Further, moving on, to illustrate how the lack of student academic motivation and low standardized test scores as a marker of neo-colonial schools' success, I'll use the example of two students in a high school in North Philadelphia, geometry course, and both could care less about learning geometry. Two young brothers. In fact, if they put forth any effort, it's only to get a grade and not for the sake of learning geometric principles, which will aid them later in trigonometry or calculus courses, or to develop critical thinking skills. One student will be, let's say one student is a 10th grader, or should be a 10th grader, but according to his credits, he's only in 9th grade. Now let's say he wants to get a CDL. Okay, now this young brother comes to school fried almost every day. You can imagine what the term fried means, right? Right? Comes to school fried almost every day, and when he's not cutting class, he sits in class listening to music and playing games on his phone, and does hardly any work. Considering his post-secondary goal, he is a success story for the status quo, because he will possibly be driving trucks to deliver the products that other people with more creativity and training have developed. He won't be involved in things such as like supply chain management analysis, or the mechanical engineering necessary for designing these 18-wheel trucks and manufacturing these 18-wheel trucks. He's not going to be involved in that. Now, I cannot and I will not, let me say this too, I cannot and I will not attempt to speak for all truck drivers, but this young boy in particular wants to be a truck driver because that is what he believes he is qualified for. That is all he believes that he can do. He doesn't think he can do that other stuff that I mentioned. Those things that require more training and more education and college degrees and things like that. He doesn't think he can do that. Or maybe he doesn't know about them, right? He is accepted, and again, excuse my language, he's accepted the definition of a nigga into his subconscious. And a part of the definition is that a nigga can drive the truck designed by somebody else to deliver the goods that somebody else created and developed. Everybody knows that so-called niggas don't create nothing except new dances that are just recycled old dances anyway. And this definition of a nigga is maintained and perpetuated by the public and charter schools. You learn that you should be a nigga in school, and you practice this craft of being a nigga in the hallways, classrooms, bathroom, and cafeteria when you're not in your community. This is another success of the schools because it renders us unable to compete with other groups. As for the other young brother, he has also been trained to be unmotivated. He has been arrested for car theft, and he has to wear an ankle monitor while in school. He comes to school to socialize and also not so he won't be marked absent for fear of truancy. He has aspirations of becoming a drug dealer and wants to leave his current school in order to attend a credit recovery school to get in his age-appropriate grade and graduate. But to graduate to what though? These credit recovery schools are another part of the machine maintaining the status quo of black underachievement. Here's how it works. Many students attend typical neighborhood elementary, middle school, and high schools, right? At the high school level, they aren't provided with the academic support that they need, really, in order to excel. This also combined with a lack of academic motivation causes them to fail multiple classes, putting them behind. They don't earn enough credits to advance from one grade to the next. You end up 17 to 18 years old with technically a 9th grade status. So these schools around the city are there in position, lurking and waiting to offer them the opportunity to make up credits and get a diploma make up credits faster and get a diploma. But the question is, when the student was in that credit recovery school in that class for Algebra 1, were they really learning Algebra 1? When they were in that physical chemistry class, getting those credits for physical chemistry, were they really learning physical chemistry? Can they have an intelligent conversation with somebody after those classes about physical chemistry and how it relates to everyday life? What about the U.S. history class? They got to make up a U.S. history credit. Were they learning U.S. history? Really? What about drug use? Now, so if students are allowed in the buildings in the morning fried, as I said, or under the influence of Percocet, Xanax, or marijuana, this also represents success for the school and larger white supremacist society. If the students are self-medicating due to trauma resulting from environmental conditions in environments controlled by other competing ethnic groups, then how will they be able to compete if they are fried? Some students are even provided a sanctioned drug regimen from early age due to special education classification. That should be an entirely other presentation about special education alone. This can serve to create a future junkie or smoker that will pose no threat to global white supremacy and will not threaten to usurp any power, land, or resources from other ethnic groups. Is this at all not consistent with chemical warfare visited upon colonized people? The British used opium to help subdue the Chinese. The French used hashish to help subdue the Algerians. The colonists on this land used so-called firewater, or the liquor, to help subdue the indigenous people here. Crack cocaine, heroin, and now prescription drugs and marijuana have been and are used to subdue our people in the here and now. As Malcolm X also said, it's the same game going all the time. And if we don't awaken to this and develop the analytical ability to read between the lines, they'll have the gas ovens already hot. And before you know it, you'll be in one. Just like the Jews were in gas ovens over there in Germany. Paul Vallis was superintendent of the school district of Philadelphia from 2002 to 2006. During his tenure, that's when I started my teaching career. And when I used to run the streets a lot more and frequent a lot of bars, I used to hang out, waste a lot of money, getting drunk, hanging out and whatnot. In and around Philly, I would see things unbecoming that I thought unbecoming of our people. And I often lamented to myself that this is all sponsored by, it was like a tongue-in-cheek comment I would always make to myself. I would say, this is all sponsored by Paul Vallis and the good people at the school district of Philadelphia. Because every one of these people in here went to one of these schools and was conditioned and trained in this behavior. And now, they're in their 20s or in their 30s in bars doing the same thing. The school experience is the common denominator that we all have. And this is true. The problems we as black people have are systemic and rooted in our chattel slavery experience that we have never recovered from. We've not. As long as we continue to send our children to these schools controlled by the descendants of our enslavers that have the same ideology and same objectives, our problems will persist. We must stop saying that these schools are failing, because what that does is it just tricks us into dedicating too much energy and resources into fixing or repairing those schools. The long-term goal should be independent education for us. These schools work perfectly in terms of what their original intent has always been. We just have to prepare to build our own and then proceed to doing it and maintain it. Alusha Continua, Lasiba Tashinda, and Billy Shockley. The struggle continues and we will conquer without a doubt. Asante Sana.